You're a disgrace, a walking blob of disappointment. The words sliced through the air like a jagged knife, leaving behind a trail of invisible wounds. Clara stood frozen in the doorway of their once shared bedroom, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure the neighbors could hear it. "You think I want to come home to this?" he spat, gesturing wildly at her. The words hit her like a physical blow and she stumbled back, her breath catching in her chest. And with that he walked out, the sound of the front door slamming shut reverberating through the empty house. Clara collapsed to the floor, her body shaking with sobs. Clara's eyes drifted to the mirror on the wall, the same mirror she had avoided for months. She forced herself to look, to really see the woman staring back at her. But as she sat there, drowning in her pain, a small, flickering ember of something began to stir deep within her. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A spark of defiance, of anger, of determination. She didn't know it yet, but that spark would grow, fueled by the pain and humiliation she had endured. It would become a fire that would consume her old self and forge her into something new, something stronger. But for now she sat there, broken and alone, the weight of her despair pressing down on her. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but Clara knew one thing for sure: she would never be the same again. Part 2. The abyss. Days turned into weeks, and Clara found herself sinking deeper into the abyss of her despair. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. Every corner, every piece of furniture, every photograph on the wall was a reminder of the life she had lost. She avoided the mirror, unable to face the reflection that stared back at her with hollow eyes. She tried to keep herself busy, to distract herself from the pain, but it was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. She would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, her heart racing as the memories of that night came flooding back. The sound of Daniel's voice, the look of disgust on his face, the finality of that slamming door, it all played on a loop in her mind, a never-ending nightmare. She stopped eating, not out of any conscious decision, but because the thought of food made her nauseous. Her clothes hung loosely on her frame, but she didn't notice. She didn't care. The world outside her window seemed distant, unreal, as if it existed in another dimension. She felt disconnected, adrift, as if she were floating in a sea of nothingness. But then one day something changed. It was a small thing, almost insignificant, but it was enough to jolt her out of her stupor. She was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV when a commercial came on. It was for a fitness program, the kind that promised quick results and a new lease on life. The woman in the commercial was radiant, confident, and strong. She spoke about overcoming obstacles, about finding strength in the face of adversity, about taking control of your life. Clara felt something stir within her, a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. She reached for the remote and turned up the volume, her eyes glued to the screen. The woman's words resonated with her, echoing the thoughts that had been swirling in her mind but that she had been too afraid to acknowledge. She could do this. She could change. She could take control of her life, of her body, of her future. She didn't have to be the woman Daniel had rejected, the woman she had become. She could be more, she could be better. With a newfound determination, Clara stood up and walked to the mirror. She forced herself to look, to really see the woman staring back at her. She didn't like what she saw, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel hopeless. She felt a spark of something, a spark that would grow into a flame that would consume her old self and forge her into something new. She didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of her journey, the first step on the path to reclaiming her life. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but Clara was ready. She was ready to fight, to overcome, to rise from the ashes of her old life and become the woman she was meant to be. Part 3. The transformation. The days that followed were a blur of sweat, tears, and determination. Clara threw herself into her new routine with a ferocity that surprised even herself. She woke up at dawn, laced up her running shoes and hit the pavement, her breath visible in the cold morning air. The first few days were agony, her body protested every step, every movement, but she pushed through the pain, fueled by a burning desire to change. She joined a gym, signing up for classes that pushed her to her limits. She lifted weights, pounded the treadmill, and stretched her body in ways she hadn't thought possible. The other gym-goers barely noticed her at first, just another face in the crowd, but as the weeks turned into months, they began to take notice. Clara's body was changing, her once soft curves giving way to lean muscle, her posture straightening, her confidence growing. But it wasn't just her body that was changing. Clara's mind was undergoing a transformation as well. She began to see herself in a new light, not as the broken, rejected woman Daniel had left behind, but as a strong, capable individual who was in control of her own destiny. She started to set goals for herself, small at first: run a mile without stopping, do 10 push-ups, fit into a pair of jeans she hadn't worn in years. But as she achieved them, her confidence grew. She also began to take care of herself in ways she hadn't in years. She started eating healthy, nourishing her body with foods that made her feel good, not just physically but mentally as well. She treated herself to new clothes, not to impress anyone else, but because she deserved to feel good about herself. She even started seeing a therapist, someone who could help her work through the pain and trauma of her past. But despite all the progress she was making, there were still moments of doubt, moments when the old insecurities crept back in. There were nights when she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she was fooling herself, if she would ever truly be happy again. But then she would remember the woman in the commercial, the woman who had inspired her to take that first step, and she would remind herself of how far she had come. She was no longer the woman Daniel had rejected. She was stronger, braver, and more determined than ever. She was a woman who had faced her demons and come out the other side, a woman who had taken control of her life and was determined to make the most of it. But as she continued on her journey, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something missing, something she needed to do to truly move on. She didn't know what it was, but she knew that when the time came she would be ready. The crisp autumn air bit at Clara's cheeks as she stood on her porch, clutching the invitation in her hands. The envelope was thick, expensive, the kind of paper that screamed luxury and status. Her name was written in elegant cursive, the ink dark and deliberate. She didn't need to open it to know who it was from. The handwriting was unmistakable: Daniel's. Her heart pounded as she tore open the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly. Inside was a card, embossed with gold lettering that gleamed in the sunlight. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Daniel and Emily." Clara's breath caught in her throat. Daniel. Getting married. To someone else. The room around her seemed to spin, the ground beneath her feet feeling unsteady. She leaned against the doorframe, the invitation slipping from her fingers and fluttering to the ground. For a moment she was back in that bedroom, standing frozen as Daniel hurled insults at her, his words cutting deeper than any knife ever could. She could still hear the sound of the door slamming shut, the finality of it echoing in her mind. She had spent months rebuilding herself, piece by piece, and now this. This invitation felt like a cruel joke, a reminder of everything she had lost. But as she stood there, staring at the fallen invitation, something shifted inside her. The initial shock and pain gave way to something else: anger. A slow, simmering anger that burned in the pit of her stomach. How dare he? How dare he invite her to his wedding, as if she were just another guest, as if the past between them meant nothing. She bent down and picked up the invitation, her grip tightening on the card. Her eyes scanned the details: the date, the location, the time. It was a lavish affair, held at one of the most exclusive venues in the city. Of course it was. Daniel had always been one for appearances, for showing off. This wedding would be no different. Clara's mind raced. She could throw the invitation away, pretend she had never seen it, and continue on with her life. But deep down, she knew that wasn't an option. She couldn't just ignore this. She needed to face it, to confront the past and finally put it to rest. But more than that, she wanted to show Daniel, and herself, that she was no longer the woman he had rejected. She was stronger now, confident and unshakable. She had worked too hard, come too far, to let this invitation undo her progress. With a deep breath, Clara made a decision. She would go to the wedding. Not as the broken, humiliated woman Daniel had left behind, but as the strong, radiant woman she had become. She would walk into that venue with her head held high, her confidence unshaken. She would show Daniel exactly what he had lost. But as she began to plan her revenge, a nagging thought crept into her mind. Something about the invitation, about Daniel's new fiancée, felt off. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but there was a sense of unease that she couldn't shake. Who was Emily? How had Daniel met her? And why had he invited Clara to the wedding? Clara's curiosity got the better of her. She sat down at her computer and began to search for information about Emily. It didn't take long to find her social media profiles. Emily was beautiful, there was no denying that. She was tall and slender, with long blonde hair and a dazzling smile. Her photos were filled with glamorous vacations, expensive dinners, and designer clothes. She was the picture-perfect bride, the kind of woman Daniel had always wanted to be seen with. But as Clara scrolled through Emily's photos, she began to notice something. There was a certain emptiness in her eyes, a lack of genuine emotion behind her smile. Her captions were filled with generic phrases and hashtags, as if she were playing a role rather than living her life. And then there were the comments, mostly from men showering her with compliments and flattery. It was all so superficial. Clara couldn't help but feel a pang of pity for Emily. She didn't know the woman, but she could see the cracks beneath the surface. Emily was living a life that looked perfect on the outside, but Clara knew all too well how deceiving appearances could be. But as she continued to dig, Clara stumbled upon something that made her blood run cold. A photo of Emily and Daniel, taken months before he had left Clara. They were at a charity gala, smiling for the camera, their bodies close together. The caption read, "Such a wonderful night with the most amazing man. #blessed #Futurumers." Clara's heart sank. Daniel had been seeing Emily while they were still married. The betrayal cut deeper than she had expected. She had always suspected that there was more to his sudden departure, but seeing the proof was a different kind of pain. But as she sat there, staring at the photo, a strange sense of clarity washed over her. This wasn't about her. It wasn't about her weight, her appearance, or her worth. Daniel's actions were a reflection of his own insecurities, his own need for validation. He had left her not because she wasn't good enough, but because he was too weak to face his own flaws. With a newfound determination, Clara closed her laptop and stood up. She would go to the wedding, not out of spite or revenge, but to close this chapter of her life once and for all. She would show Daniel, and herself, that she was no longer defined by his rejection. She was stronger, braver, and more resilient than he had ever given her credit for. But as she began to prepare for the wedding, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than she had realized. Something about Emily, about Daniel's sudden marriage, felt off. She didn't know what it was, but she was determined to find out. And when the day of the wedding arrived, Clara would be ready. Ready to face the past, to confront the truth, and to finally move on. But little did she know, the wedding would hold a revelation that would change everything. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, the kind of day that seemed tailor-made for a fairy tale. But for Clara, it felt more like the calm before the storm. She stood in front of her mirror, her reflection staring back at her with a mixture of determination and apprehension. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, and now that it was here, she felt a strange sense of calm. Her transformation was undeniable. The woman in the mirror was a far cry from the broken, humiliated figure Daniel had left behind. Her body was lean and toned, the result of months of hard work and discipline. Her skin glowed with health, her eyes sparkled with confidence, and her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders. She wore a sleek, form-fitting dress that hugged her curves in all the right places, the deep emerald green fabric complementing her complexion perfectly. Clara took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. This was it. The moment she had been waiting for. She was ready. The wedding was held at one of the most exclusive venues in the city, a grand ballroom that exuded luxury and opulence. As Clara stepped inside, she was immediately struck by the sheer extravagance of it all. The room was filled with the soft glow of candlelight, the air thick with the scent of flowers and expensive perfume. The guests were dressed to the nines, their laughter and chatter filling the room. Clara stood at the back of the room, her eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Daniel. He looked the same as she remembered, tall, handsome, impeccably dressed, but there was something different about him. He was smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. He looked uncomfortable. Her gaze shifted to the woman standing beside him, his new bride. Emily was beautiful, there was no denying that. She was tall and slender, with long blonde hair and a dazzling smile. She wore a gown that looked like it had been plucked straight out of a bridal magazine, the intricate lace and beading catching the light with every movement. But there was something about her that felt off. Clara couldn't quite put her finger on it, but she knew there was more to this story than met the eye. As the ceremony began, Clara felt a surge of emotions. She had expected to feel anger, sadness, even jealousy, but instead she felt nothing. The man standing at the altar was no longer the man she had loved, the man she had built a life with. He was a stranger, a chapter in her life that had long since closed. But as the ceremony progressed, Clara began to notice something. Daniel's eyes kept darting around the room as if he were searching for something, or someone. And then their eyes met. For a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. Clara saw a flicker of something in his eyes, regret, perhaps, or maybe even longing. But then it was gone, replaced by a mask of indifference. Clara felt a surge of satisfaction. She had done it. She had shown him that she was no longer the woman he had rejected, that she had risen above his cruelty and come out stronger on the other side. But as she turned to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than she had realized. The reception was a lavish affair with a live band, a gourmet dinner, and an open bar. Clara mingled with the other guests, her confidence radiating with every step. She could feel the eyes of the other guests on her, their whispers and glances following her as she moved through the room. She knew they were talking about her, speculating about why she was there, but she didn't care. She was here for herself, not for them. As the night wore on, Clara found herself drawn to the dance floor. The band was playing a slow, romantic song, and the couples around her swayed to the music. She closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her, and for a moment she allowed herself to forget where she was. But then she felt a hand on her arm and her eyes snapped open. It was Daniel. He stood there, his expression unreadable, his eyes searching hers. "Clara," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the music. I didn't expect to see you here." Clara's heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral. "I was invited, wasn't I?" she replied, her voice steady. Daniel hesitated, his eyes flickering to Emily, who was across the room, laughing with a group of guests. I didn't think you'd come," he admitted. Clara shrugged, a small smile playing on her lips. "I wanted to see for myself what you've been up to," she said. "And I have to say, Daniel, you've outdone yourself. This is quite the spectacle." Daniel's expression darkened, and for a moment, Clara thought he might say something more. But then he simply nodded and walked away, leaving her standing there, her heart pounding in her chest. As the night went on, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Daniel's behavior, Emily's distant demeanor, the way the other guests seemed to be watching them, it all felt staged. Like they were all playing a part in some elaborate charade. And then, as the clock struck midnight, the truth finally came to light. Clara was standing near the bar, sipping a glass of champagne, when she overheard a conversation between two of the guests. "Can you believe it?" one of them whispered. "Daniel marrying Emily after everything that happened with Clara. It's like he's trying to prove something." "I know," the other replied. "But you know what they say, marry in haste, repent at leisure. I give it 6 months tops." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She turned to the two women, her curiosity getting the better of her. "Excuse me," she said, her voice calm but firm. "What do you mean, after everything that happened with Clara?" The two women exchanged a glance, clearly unsure of how much to say. But then one of them leaned in, her voice low. "You didn't hear it from me," she said, "but Daniel's been having financial trouble. Big trouble. Rumor has it he's only marrying Emily for her money. Her family's loaded and he's desperate." Clara's mind raced. It all made sense now. The lavish wedding, the sudden marriage, the way Daniel had looked at her during the ceremony. He wasn't in love with Emily. He was using her. But as Clara stood there, processing this revelation, she realized something else. This wasn't about her. It wasn't about revenge or proving anything to Daniel. This was about Emily, about the woman who was about to marry a man who didn't love her, who was only using her for her money. Clara felt a surge of determination. She couldn't let this happen. She couldn't stand by and watch another woman be hurt the way she had been. She had to do something. But as she turned to leave, she felt a hand on her arm. It was Emily. Her eyes were wide, her expression filled with a mixture of fear and desperation. "Clara," she said softly, her voice trembling, "I need to talk to you." And with that, Clara knew that the night was far from over. The wedding, the truth, the revelation, it was all just beginning. And she was ready to face it no matter what. Emily's grip on Clara's arm was firm, her eyes wide and pleading. The music and laughter around them seemed to fade into the background as Clara focused on the woman standing before her. Emily's flawless makeup couldn't hide the panic in her expression, and her voice trembled as she spoke. "Clara, please," Emily whispered, her words rushed and desperate. "I need to talk to you. Somewhere private. Now." Clara hesitated, her mind racing. What could Emily possibly want to say to her? Was this some kind of trap? But the fear in Emily's eyes was genuine, and Clara's curiosity, and perhaps a lingering sense of empathy, won out. She nodded and followed Emily through the crowd, weaving past guests who were too caught up in the festivities to notice the tension between the two women. They slipped into a small, dimly lit room off the main ballroom, a private lounge meant for the bride and groom. The door clicked shut behind them, muffling the noise of the reception. Emily turned to face Clara, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her breathing uneven. "I know you probably hate me," Emily began, her voice shaking. "And I don't blame you. But I need you to know the truth. About Daniel. About everything." Clara crossed her arms, her expression guarded. "Go on," she said, her tone neutral but firm. Emily took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for what she was about to say. "Daniel and I, it's not what you think. This wedding, this marriage, it's not real. It's all a lie." Clara raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. "Explain." Emily's shoulders slumped, and she sank into a nearby chair, her hands trembling. "Daniel's in trouble. Big trouble. He's been drowning in debt for years and he's desperate. My family were wealthy. He thought if he married me he could get access to my family's money. He's been manipulating me from the start, telling me everything I wanted to hear, making me believe he loved me. But it's all a lie." Clara's mind raced as she processed Emily's words. She had suspected that Daniel's motives weren't pure, but hearing it confirmed was still a shock. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice steady. Emily looked up at her, tears welling in her eyes. "Because I didn't know. Not until tonight. I overheard him talking to one of his friends, bragging about how he was going to fix everything with my money. I felt so stupid, so used, and then I saw you and I thought maybe you could help me. You know him better than anyone. You know what he's capable of." Clara's heart ached for Emily despite everything. She knew all too well what it felt like to be manipulated by Daniel, to have your trust betrayed. But she also knew that Emily's situation was far more complicated than her own had been. "What do you want me to do?" Clara asked, her voice softening. Emily wiped her tears, her expression hardening with resolve. "I want to expose him. I want everyone to know the truth. But I can't do it alone. I need your help." Clara hesitated, her mind racing. She had come to the wedding to close a chapter in her life, not to get involved in another drama. But as she looked at Emily, she saw herself, a woman who had been hurt and betrayed by the same man. She couldn't turn her back on her. "All right," Clara said finally. "What's the plan?" The two women spent the next hour strategizing, their initial tension giving way to a strange camaraderie. Emily revealed that she had evidence of Daniel's financial troubles. Bank statements, emails, and even recordings of his conversations with his friends. Together, they devised a plan to expose him during the reception, when all the guests were gathered and the spotlight was on him. As they returned to the ballroom, Clara felt a surge of adrenaline. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice, for herself, for Emily, and for anyone else Daniel had hurt. The reception was in full swing, the dance floor packed with guests, the air filled with laughter and music. Daniel stood at the center of it all, a glass of champagne in his hand, his smile wide but hollow. Clara and Emily exchanged a glance, a silent agreement passing between them. Emily stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise like a knife. "Everyone, can I have your attention, please?" The room fell silent, all eyes turning to the bride. Daniel's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Emily. "Emily, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice tight. Emily ignored him, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "I have something important to say. Something that everyone here needs to hear." Daniel stepped forward, his expression darkening. "Emily, this isn't the time." "No, Daniel," Emily interrupted, her voice firm. "This is exactly the time." She turned to the guests, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "This wedding, this marriage, it's all a lie. Daniel doesn't love me. He never did. He's been using me, manipulating me, all so he could get access to my family's money. He's in debt and he thought marrying me would solve all his problems." The room erupted in gasps and murmurs, the guests exchanging shocked glances. Daniel's face turned red with anger, his hands clenching into fists. "That's not true," he shouted, his voice shaking. "She's lying." But Emily wasn't finished. She pulled out her phone and held it up, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "I have proof. Emails, bank statements, recordings. It's all here. Daniel's been lying to all of you, to me, to Clara, to everyone." Clara stepped forward, her presence commanding attention. "It's true," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Daniel's been manipulating people for years. He left me because he thought I wasn't good enough, but the truth is, he's the one who's not good enough. He's a coward, a liar, and a fraud." The room was in chaos, the guests whispering and pointing, their shock and disbelief palpable. Daniel stood frozen, his face pale, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. And then, without a word, he turned and fled, pushing through the crowd and disappearing into the night. The aftermath of the revelation was a whirlwind. The guests dispersed, their whispers and gossip filling the air. Emily stood in the center of the room, her shoulders slumped but her head held high. Clara approached her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay?" Clara asked softly. Emily nodded, a small, sad smile on her lips. I will be. Thanks to you. Clara shook her head. You did this, Emily. You stood up to him. That takes courage. Emily looked at her, her eyes filled with gratitude. I couldn't have done it without you. Thank you, Clara. For everything. Clara smiled, a sense of peace settling over her. She had come to the wedding seeking closure, but she had found something far more valuable: justice and the knowledge that she had helped someone else escape Daniel's web of lies. As she left the venue, the cool night air brushing against her skin, Clara felt a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in years. The past was behind her, and the future was hers to shape. She had faced her demons, confronted her pain, and come out stronger on the other side. And as she walked away, her head held high, Clara knew one thing for certain. She was no longer defined by Daniel's rejection. She was Clara, strong, confident, and unstoppable. And nothing and no one could ever take that away from her.